tiếng Việt để mà mình nghe cái phần phiên dịch tiếng Việt. So welcome everyone. Oh, I saw you, Nipun. Nipun is here already. Yeah, hello, hi. So before we start, I would like to invite all of us to have a moment of silence. Thank you. Welcome everyone again. Nhi Ngọc, can you please outline me for people to easily follow? So, welcome everyone. We know that you are joining this webinar from different part of the country or also different countries of the world. So, welcome. Since we launched the Genius Masterclass last August, we already conducted 3 public webinars, and this is the third one. But this is the so special one because we need to so carefully manage the communication and the registration. Because if we spread the word so widely, the capacity of the Zoom gonna be overloaded. So what's the reason? Because people are interested in the topic or in something else. So may I ask, how many of you were familiar or have heard about Nipun Mehta or Karma Kitchen or Kin Circle before? If so, please you send us the heart emoji to let us know how many of you. Yeah, yeah, we see many hearts. Yes, yes. Wow. Yes, so beautiful. Yes, so because the guest speaker today is so special. It's the Nipun Mehta. He's the founder of Service Space, the global voluntary community in across different countries, and they initiate many experiments for Karma Kitchen, Okin Circle, Karma Tube, Daily Good, many, many. And I believe that many of you among ourselves today, we are already and we are currently volunteering in the service-based experiment in Vietnam and in abroad as well. And to talk about Nipun, I think that I don't have enough words to describe about himself because he's so. I remember that I had the chance to join the international retreat in Ahmedabad in India twice, and I had the chance to witness the pioneers from globally. Once they received the invitation from Nipun to join the retreat for 10 days in India, even though they didn't understand at all what the retreat is about and what the agenda, but they put everything aside, their busy schedule aside, to flew all over the place to join the retreat 10 days in India. It's because of him. He has a super magnetic power. And how can he be like this? He's so, giant. He's a giant. He's like, he's so, like physically, if you met him in person, he have a giant arms. He can protect you. He can, he can cover your back and push you, gently move forward. And at the same time, he's so humble and so modest. He sat on the floor to translate for people. Or, he washed the dishes, in the retreat. So offers so much act of kindness to all of us. And as a giant human being in this planet, he was nominated by His Holiness Dalai Lama as an unsung hero of compassion because enormous of act of kindness he had been doing with the community in the world. And he's also, appointed by the former U.S. President Barack Obama, to serve in the advisory council, in the U.S. for the poverty and the equality. So, and he here today with us. It's not what he speak about the laddership. It's not the concept at all. He's like this. He's a ladder. He has a strong leadership skill and spirit. But at the same time, he's the ladder. So what he's sharing with us, we're gonna learn from him is not from what he speaks, but also from who he is. So that's the reason why, the service community in all over the world, once he's in the space, everybody gonna, fly over to be surrounding, with him. And why today, many Vietnamese community sisters and brothers have the chance to know Nipun and to serve with the service tech community because of one person who already built the bridge for such a long time, nearly 10 years, is Thầy Hà Vĩnh Thọ. So he's the one who connect us with Nipun, and he's the one to connect all the community in Vietnam and in abroad. So I would like to invite Thầy Hà Vĩnh Thọ to welcome Nipun with us. Dear Thầy, floor is yours.
Thank you. So it's really a joy and an honor to welcome Nipun today in our large GNH community. It is very special because actually when I first met Nipun, it was a program that was very similar to the GNH masterclass that we are doing ourselves right now in Vietnam. And of course, many of the participants today are part of the masterclass, but there's also many other people who have joined. So I will not repeat what Luan already said about Nipun, and it's so true because really the experience I think that we all have, those of us who have had the chance to meet Nipun, is that I would say one of the main characteristics is that he's a man who walks the talk. So he really embodies, the values that he's promoting, and the message that he's sharing is something that is really, you can experience it, just being together with him. So I would just briefly would like to recall the first time I met with Nipun. So at that time, we were doing a program that was actually very similar to the GNH Masterclass. It was a program that at that time I was with the GNH Center in Bhutan, and we had a program that we did together with the Presencing Institute, so Otto Scharmer's group, and supported by the German government. And we had 3 modules. The first one was in Berlin, the second one in Bhutan, and the third one in Costa Rica. And Nipun was one of the participants. So it means that I had met him already before, so in Berlin, in Bhutan. But the strongest memory for me was really our meeting in Costa Rica. So we were in if I recall well, is San Jose is the name of the capital of Costa Rica, and we were having a retreat very similar to to a GNH retreat. And then one day it was, I think, Nipun's idea to encourage us to go out of we were in a hotel or a retreat center and to go in the streets of San Jose. And he gave us two advice. The first one was just go around the city and ask people, what does happiness mean for you? And so there was a group, I don't remember, we're maybe 50 people or so, and we went around in groups of two or three uh, in the city, and we asked people, what does happiness mean for you? And it was really quite an amazing experience because we got in such a deep conversations with people that we obviously didn't know. We just, walked up to them in the middle of the street and then started this conversation on happiness. So that was one very powerful memory from that encounter. And a second impulse that Nipun has given us, and that those of you who are familiar with Karma Kitchen and all that will uh, easily understand. He said, if you have a chance and you go into a bar or restaurant or coffee or something, why don't you simply pay for someone's, drinks or food or whatever they had, just go up to the counter and pay for them. Don't even tell them that you've paid for them. Just pay for them and walk out. And so that at the moment when these people will have to pay their bill, the waiter will tell them, oh, somebody else has already paid your bill. So I was with another Costa Rican lady, and we did that in two or three places. And it was amazing just the experience that we didn't know the people for whom we paid. They never knew who had paid for them. And we were not there when they found out that, we had paid for them. So there was absolutely zero transaction. It was just purely a free deed, you know. But I remember still the feeling, the emotions that I had doing that, and how I thought, such a small, simple gesture can create such plant a seed of love and gratitude and kindness that can really have ripple effects very far. And I think that's really one of the characteristics of what I have understood of what Nipun has done throughout his life is, these simple acts of kindness that seem quite modest, quite small, but actually have a tremendous ripple effect and actually change the whole vibration, the whole atmosphere in a society, in a city, in a context where this act of unconditional love are just done out of generosity. And that's really some moments that I recall from our meeting with Nipun that really stayed with me as a founding moment of our friendship. So, dear Nipun, without further ado, I would like to hand you the floor. Oh, Lisi is not here today, and she said, please don't forget to give my love to Nipun. So I have to report to her that I did give my love to you, her love to you. So, Nipun, Lisi sends a big hug and lots of love. And with that, I hand the floor to you, Nipun, and thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thầy.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, thank you, Nipun. No, I cannot, how I can describe my gratitude to you because now I know that at your time it's 5:30, 5:40 something a.m. But you so say yes and you so, be here with us. We cannot, how we can express our gratitude to with you. And floor is yours, Nipun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Well, I don't know if what I say will make as much sense if it was the normal waking hours for me, but as they say, if you've really embodied it, even if you wake up at 2 a.m., love is still love. So I hope to be in that space. Thank you, Tal, for the warm introduction. I remember that time in Costa Rica. I think someone had taken a video, and the beautiful thing about doing small acts of kindness is how alive you become. I mean, we all had split into some small groups of four or something, and there somebody had taken a video of four of us in my little group, and it was so incredible that even if you didn't do an act of kindness, if you're just in that space and you come alive. And you feel related, even if it was a stranger with whom you connected, you just feel deeply, deeply related. And it just makes you come alive in such a profound way that I don't understand why we don't do more of it. And I think once you get the taste of it, you just can't do it any other way. I mean, there's just no other. Everything else feels like a bad party. This just seems like the grand party you want to be at. It's the party of love. So thank you all for standing for those values in your own different contexts. Today, our topic is leadership or laddership. I read some of the questions that some of you had written before joining the call. And so maybe before I even get into the topic, I'll just say this, that I think there's a fork in the road in terms of how we engage with the world. And on one side is transaction, and on the other side is relationships. And what does it mean? So we have a pretty good understanding of what it means to lead with transaction because that's everywhere. What does it mean to lead with relationship and connection? And what is it? It's a lot more than just, oh, you and I know each other. We have each other's email addresses, or you exist and I exist, and now two of us are less lonely. It actually takes you down a very different path of emergence because when it's no longer a me to me connection, it's not the me part of Nipun and the me part of you coming together, but it's actually me and all my
Nó không phải là
conditions, a
giao dịch
kind
như
of
vậy,
a
mà
we,
nó
and
nó
you
là
and all
cái
your
khái niệm
conditions,
về
a deeper
chúng ta
we there.
chúng ta
It
đang
becomes a
gắn kết
very
với
deeper
nhau
we
theo một cái tôi
connection,
sâu sắc
that
hơn,
feels
và
so much
chính nhờ cái
else
sự kết
emerges.
nối đó
And so the
mà
question
rất là
really
nhiều thứ đã khởi
becomes
sinh lên.
that of around leadership is how do we
Và
lead
chính cái đó
with
ta gọi là
relationship,
leadership, đó là khi
with
chúng
the
ta dẫn
gifts
dắt
of that
với mối quan
emergence.
hệ, với món quà
And
của
so
sự.
I'll get a little bit more into it, but I wanted to start with the story. Um, It's a story of I wanted to start with an interaction. I met a Japanese monk a few months ago. I was in a retreat in Japan, and we were all sitting there. And in my group, there was this monk, and he was an interesting guy. He said he went into he was doing business stuff. He went to one of the top business schools in the world. And he then continued to succeed and was in many powerful boardrooms. But in his heart, he wanted to kind of make a difference, and he thought that this would help him do that. And then what he realized is that maybe there was an output that was useful, but they were all using the language, as he called it, the language of war. And I said, okay, well, what is the language of war? And he says, well, language of war is it's like a language of winning. It's like I want to beat you. It's defeat. It's context. It's aggression. It's extraction. It's domination. And he gave all these examples of how it was a language of war that was the baseline. And so he said it got him thinking, well, what are these new languages of peace, of love, of compassion? And then it got him thinking, well, what is the language of the future? And how do we engage in that? Um, so I like that question. What is the language of the future? that we want to be a part of seeding through our lives, through our present context. Um, there was a NYU professor. I have some slides. I'll show you some slides at some point. But there was a professor in New York. His name was James P. Carse. This is many decades ago. He wrote a small little book, it was called Finite and Infinite Games. And he starts with this idea that we're just busy playing very finite games. And he says, what is a finite game? Finite game is a game that you play for the purpose of winning. And then he goes on and describes the infinite game, which is played not for the purpose of winning, but for continuing the play. So I want to start with a couple of examples of this finite game, and I'll get a little bit more into this idea of laddership after that, and it would be great to actually have a dialogue soon after that. So here's a here's a few slides which I hope you can see. This is my Japanese friend. And so this finite game is played for the purpose of winning, right? Um, and that, if you look at our society, just winning, 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 winning hasn't really served us well. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by the founder of LinkedIn, who's actually a really nice guy, but he, back in 2011, said this to the Wall Street Journal. He says, social networks do best when they tap into one of the seven deadly sins. Facebook is ego, Zynga, which is a gaming company, is sloth, and LinkedIn, his own company, is greed. And so he's basically saying, thank you for using my platform. I am manipulating the greed impulse in you. I am manipulating your base instinct. Um, and that's a very, that's sort of, yes, we can go there, but we are capable of much more. And the questions that people like us, I think, uh, know to ask, and I think is critical to ask, is not just designing for our base impulse of these seven deadly sins, and then the sort of language of war that comes, and then the manifestations of that, is to really try to change that narrative. But if you look everywhere, if you look at what's actually happening, we're just multiplying this base impulse, which is consumption, 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 more, more, more. And none of it satisfied. So, which is why it's like an itch we just keep on doing. This is a photo of what they call a dopamine culture, which is that, why is it that we refresh our phones 2,600 times a day? We do it because every time there's a small dopamine kick in our brains. And this dopamine is very addictive. And so if you look at all these sectors of society, you see that, like, this is just like the whole bunch of these things. We don't have to read them all, but even the first one, we used to play a sport. Now we watch a sport. Then we started just watching a sport. And now it's not even a full game. It's like you're gambling within each small part of the game. It just sucks the life out of it, right? And the other one I really like in there is we used to write handwritten letters, and now we just kind of then we started doing these voice memos in this very speedy culture, and now it's like just text. Um, Instead of being related, we're just swiping left and right, and that cheapens the game. Um, and I think that's creating a lot of different crises. This is if you're Indian, this is not considered a traffic jam, but if you're not Indian, this is you might look at a road like this and say, "Wow, that's crazy," and this feels like the world that. Some people are going this way, and some people are trying to solve problems of the world, but your solution is someone else's problem. And it's just like, and everywhere you go, everyone's trying to solve these problems, but it's actually just instead of creating sustainable, regenerative solutions that elevate us, we're actually spiraling down. Um, And so what James P. Carr said was he says, hey, look, a finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game is played for the purpose of continuing the play. So how do we operate in a way that we are actually continuing the play? I actually had a really nice encounter. I was in Austria recently, and I was sitting down for breakfast, and this guy came in front of me, and he's an author. His name's Daniel, and I didn't know. I was just like, oh, that's Daniel. And he sits down and he shares something very profound that left a big imprint on me. He says, my son came back from school today, or not today, but recently. And when he came back, he says, Dad, my teacher was absent today. He's like, well, what do you mean absent? Your teacher didn't show up? He says, no, my teacher's body showed up, but my teacher's mind was absent. And we got to talking about that, and we said, we live in this culture of incredible absence. Um, and we got to talking about it, and we said, well, there's absence, um, but we really need to move from absence to presence. Our attention span these days is like 8.5, 8 seconds, I think, the lowest of all species. It used to be much more 20 years ago, but it's just continuing to go down. So how do we move from absence to presence? But then it doesn't just stop there, from presence to regeneration, where your presence meets my presence and it regenerates. And this is something we as a culture don't really do. So, the first question I think is an important question, which is to move from absence to presence. We have to ask ourselves, how do we cultivate inner transformation? It's very critical because if we have a culture of absence, no one feels satisfied. So we need to kind of move to presence. But then from presence to regeneration is also an important question, which is to say, what are these architectures of social regeneration? And this is where laddership really starts to come in. If it's just your absence meeting my absence, we could be in the same room, but it's polarizing. Because I am stuck in my own small little bubble inside me, and you are in your own bubble, and there's not much co-regulation going on. But if my absence is met by your presence, there's a kind of healing. And when your presence is met by my presence, there's a regeneration. So we can't control what other people are going to do, but we can move into our from being absent to present. And I think as more of us do that, we really start to cultivate these new fields of possibility. Um, and that field, I like to, you can, in a simple way, I'll share with you how we ran into this, but in a simple way, it's really to move from market logic to love logic. And so what do I mean by that? Which is really to move from transaction, which is I do this for you. What are you doing back for me? What's in it for me? We even listen in this way, right? These days, they're like, what are my takeaways? As if you have the pockets to like put it all and like become this big person because now you have all these takeaways. Your takeaways have never made you. If it was as simple as takeaways, we would all be healed by the time AI comes. So, unfortunately, this is where the world is going. And what it does is the reason why we like transaction is because it gives us this fake sense of security through accumulation. Um, but really, how do we move from transaction to relationship? And what relationship starts to inspire is not accumulation, but circulation to share our gifts. So what you see there, I won't speak much about Karma Kitchen or some of our other projects today, but what you see there, these little kids, each one is massaging the person in front of them, giving them a shoulder rub. So it's not a transactional thing. I do this for you, and what are you doing back for me? But everyone is paying it forward for the person around them. And when we do that, there is an asymmetry. Like I may give a good, great shoulder rub, but get a pretty bad one, right? So you're like, maybe I should go to a masseuse and, pay my money and get that kind of a massage. But what you get in return from being related like this is that you get the circle. We get each other. We get the field of emergence. Um, and so, uh, if we look at our current world, right, and it's not just as simple as, well, let's just be related, kumbaya. If we are transactional, we know what happens. If I'm, in that mode over time, you just have extraction. And when you have so much extraction, we have complete disconnection. This is what we all tend to feel. And in this world today, there's so much research, I won't bore you with it. But if you go the other way, right, towards relationships, like this love logic, where does it take us? It starts to deepen our context in which we are related. It's not just that now I know you, you know me, and that if we are working together. It starts to build a deeper context. In that deeper context, you don't just have me to me connections, but you have we to we connections. It's a lot richer. And as you have that, you start to build a field of emergence. And in that regenerative field of emergence, where your presence is meeting my presence, you really start to create, you start to feel profoundly connected. And so this possibility is open to us only if we start to shift. The fork in the road is at the moment we are transactional. If I can go to a much more relational framework, it can really start to take us down a very different path. And so over here, I think, let's see, I don't know if the audio is going to show up. Do I need to share with audio on? I think I do. Okay. Let me see. Okay, now you tell me if you're not able to um, hear this, but okay, I think it should work. Okay.
It's like one of the monks, to give you that, in contrast to me, he spent 19 years and 6 months in a cave, not my cave, in another cave. And then he got piles, where you can't sit and etc. And in his case, he didn't go to the village. They left him the food in his bowl, which was hanging from a tree. So he didn't see anybody for more than 19 years. Didn't see anybody. He then needed this health treatment. He was about 50, 60 years of age. And the monks, including me, were very curious. What was his experience like? I was 9 months. Peanuts. His was 19 and a half years. And the monks, so we sat round and the translator was translating. The monk said, what was it like? What was your experience? What insights did you get? He said, yes, I spent 19 and a half years in the cave. It was a complete waste of time. And the monk said, whoa, wow, we didn't, last thing we expected to hear. And why was it a waste of time? He said, I realized while in the cave, life is about relationship. And the monks said, as we say, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well said, well said, well said. We like the honesty of it. Complete waste of time. This is monk's life.
It's that's, by the way, is Christopher Titmuss, a very sort of famous and accomplished teacher in his own right, and he's saying, "Wow, and he was a monk, and he was a pretty hardcore monk, and then they saw this guy 19 years in a cave, and they were like, "Wow, what have you learned?" He's like, "Hey, if you don't understand relationships, you haven't really gotten too far." And so, this sense of the deep roots around what this is, and there are different people who express it in different ways. I like what Fukuoka, who's a Japanese farmer who was sort of the grandfather of permaculture, and he essentially was getting to this notion that it takes a forest to grow a fruit, that no fruit, because of all the relationships of all the elements in the field, that is what allows a fruit to manifest. It's not just that one tree, it's not just that one branch. And we see examples of this in nature. I love this photo. This is thousands and thousands of little birds, known as starlings. They come together, and in a spontaneous moment, the person who took this photo didn't even realize he took it. It was National Geographic Photo of the Year a few years ago. And essentially, these starlings were like, oh, we need to respond. There's a threat. What do they do? These thousands and hundreds of thousands of birds probably come together and create this formation in a snap of a finger. And like, how did they coordinate that? How did they come together like that? It wasn't a transactional framework that got them to do that. It was something much more relational. And so we see examples of this everywhere, and in service space, we ran across this in a very curious way. Most of you would probably know about service space, so I won't tell you much about it. But for 25 years, we started 25 years ago, and we've been doing all kinds of things. We started by building websites for nonprofits and so many local circles. Like there's so many in Vietnam with the Awaken circles. There's a lot of virtual activity. Now we're doing a lot of stuff with AI. But underneath it, um, what we thought we would do, and all of these, I'll mention these because they go back to this pivot from transaction to relationship. We had these three rules. The first one was that, and we've had these since the day we started. First one was that we're not going to have any staff. The second one was that we're not going to do any fundraising. And the third one was, I think we're going to do away with impact as well. So you, so you look at this and you're like, what? This is crazy. Like, what? You might look at that and say, who invited this guy on stage? Like, what? He doesn't have any staff, and so no real capacity to do anything, no money. So how are you going to move the world? And he doesn't care for impact. Like, what is that? And it looks like, when a kid, we used to do these lemonade stands, in the US, it's a thing. And it's like, oh, yay, I'm gonna do a lemonade stand. And it's sweet, right? It's really nice. But you say, well, nothing substantial can come out of that. So it's like, it's not a big deal, and this is what we grew up with. But what we realized is that when you don't have staff, you are intrinsically motivated. And when you really get a lot of insight into what it means to be deeply intrinsically motivated, if you're motivated by money or power or influence, it's a degenerative resource. If you have it, you say, okay, well, I'll do this for you, give me this in return. Next time I do it, I'll need even more in return. And if you don't have more, you have to go extract more. And this is the condition we've put everybody in because we don't understand intrinsic motivations. They are profound. Um, because we didn't fundraise, we realized, oh, wait 1 second. The money is a kind of capital, sure, and it's wonderful when it's used in the right ways. But there's also so many other forms of wealth. And so much of it is just sitting right there to be taken. But we're so focused on this one kind of wealth that we miss this entire, entire portfolio that's just right there for the taking, this incredible abundance. And lastly, like, because you're not looking to say, hey, I want to measure this and do this in the world, you would honor small acts. You're like, oh, that was a small act, like what my mom has been doing her whole life for me, or my dad has been doing for his whole life. you're like, oh, well, I don't know. What is the impact of that? My great grandfather used to feed ants, and as his daily practice, he would take, these small grains of wheat. He was very financially poor, but he would take these wheat and he would crush them. And then every day on his walk, he would go and feed the ants. That was his philanthropy. And when you do that, you say, well, and what's the impact? You don't know. But when you do these small acts, you start to get related and you start to create these many to many networks. So because of our constraints, we actually learned so many different things, and all of them start to point to this fork in the road from transaction to relationship and connection. And what you typically have is, hey, I want to change the world in this way. That's a good impulse. We all do. I mean, I think all of us would wish that there was less suffering in the world. So we want to create that impact. That's wonderful, right? But then the process we use is that we start with that intention, and then we say, okay, well, what's the project plan? How do we hire the people? And then maybe those people may have some inner transformation or not, but that's secondary because the impact is what I care for. So here, what we learned, what we stumbled into, I mean, we were just trying to be those kids that were doing a lemonade stand. But what we stumbled into is that what if we start with our own inner transformation first? And when you do, like To was talking about in Costa Rica, strangers in a community we don't know yet, it's like it works like a charm. The moment you start to tap into that inner transformation of you being your separate self to really being together, you immediately there's a kind of kinship. You start feeling it. And when people start to come together, I could give you hundreds of these examples in random contexts, even where you don't know the language. It's amazing how quickly and spontaneously and organically you can just create these connections if you're in that space in yourself. And once you have people around you, what are you going to do? You're going to end up doing stuff together. And as you do that, you will have impact. So this sort of flips the whole paradigm on its head. And it does it because you start with inner transformation and you lead with relationships. Um, so we think of it as, there's this whole buzzword. I'm from the Silicon Valley, so I won't talk about AI today, but we've been doing a lot of AI stuff. But there's this buzzword called generative AI, which is what these chatbots are, ChatGPT and stuff. But we think of it as generative HI, heart intelligence. So if you serve without transaction, right, where does it get you? Um, there's an immediate inner transformation in you. And you start to, like, let's say you do an act of kindness, immediately there's your dopamine is released and serotonin, oxytocin, all these endorphins. I mean, it's incredible. It feels like eating thousands of chocolate bars to your body. So and chocolate bars are not good for you, not that many, but acts of kindness, wow, you get the same effect, right? Like, and it's much more than that, but that's just an immediate, obvious start. But it really starts to change you. And as you do that, you realize that these are nature funded with like this joy and this compassion. Like immediately you start to feel related. You don't need any marketing. I don't need to convince you. In all these years working with like thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers, we've never had volunteer of the month. We've never, because it's like if you're doing volunteering right, like nature's already rewarding you. Like what more do you want? Everything else will pale in comparison. And when you are nature funded like that, then you immediately, not immediately, but over time, but you start to fall into these murmurations, like those thousands of birds. That's called a murmuration. And that, you start working together because you are related in a much deeper way. And then we like to say in service-based, this is the generative part. This is where love begets more love, because the moment you fall into this murmuration, you're like, wow, this is right. You just your whole entire body sings that song, and you feel like doing more, right? More of the same. And so we joke in service space that the reward for service is not the impact, is not the recognition, is not even the momentary feeling. Reward for service is more service. It's you can't stop it. Once you see it clearly, you're gonna do it. And so, this was something that Gandhi would say that, hey, this is called the law of love. And those ancient people who discovered that were greater scientists than even our modern scientists. And this is not like a feeling. This is not like, oh, this like, it's a nice feeling in the heart. This is very precise. It's very subtle and it's very precise. And Gandhi would say that it would work with greater precision than even the law of electricity or the law of gravitation. So what is this precise law of love, right? And that brings us to um, leadership and laddership, the distinction. Like, what does it mean to not just lead with transactions, but to actually build a field of relationships in which all kinds of emergence can happen. And how do we lead with relationships? So, three quick things I would say. When we are related in a small way, which is great, it's a great start. But as more things get related, this is true even at a micro level in our brain, this is true at a social level, and I think this is true at a planetary and cosmic level as well. Um, as the density of the in relationships increases, we start to have this profound sense of flow. This is when, like, it's not just, Nipun and Loan coming together. It's actually like Nipun and Loan and, you know, hi and let's see, I'm looking at and toe, right? Like so, and like if you have thousands and thousands of such interactions, you really start to get in a flow state. So how do we lead with not just with relationships and then the its later part, which is to lead with flow? And I think there's three core things around this, right? One is we have to learn to sense the flow. Um, and when I say sense, this is a slide that I often use, that if I am speaking and you are listening, and there's 50 of you, we have 50 connections, as you see on the left side there. If instead of just those 50 connections, each one of us is talking to each other, you would have 1,225 connections. If, however, we do a many-to-many network, a group forming network, you would have, just in a room full of 50 people, you would have 100 million trillion connections. And so imagine standing out there and saying, like, if we are all related, can you sense into the 100 million trillion? That's the flow. Most of us go into a room and sense 50. Why? Because we are in that individual, separate, disconnected part of ourselves, and we project that onto everybody. But the moment we change that, we start to change how we see the possibility in that room. And so that's what I mean by sensing into the flow, that is not just in a centralized way or a decentralized way, but really this heart to heart kind of a distributed way. Um, so that's the first one. And I think the second part of that, as you sense and you're like, oh my God, it's not just like 10 things together. It's not just 50 things together. It's like 100 million trillion connections are possible just with 50. And there's more than 50 things any moment you step outside anywhere. And so what does it mean to sense into it, but then to embrace it? And embracing is what, like, I love this example of surfers. So a surfer has to ride the wave. They don't come back and say, let me change the wave. I don't like the wave. This is not the right wave for me to surf. right? The moment you try to change the wave, you're not a good surfer. You need to learn to ride the wave. And so what does it mean to embrace the flow, to learn how to ride the wave, to build the inner resources so you can learn to ride the wave of all kinds of ups and downs that life is going to give us individually, but also collectively. And that's a big part of it. And lastly, the third thing is that you don't just like learn, you don't just embrace it, you count on it, you trust in it. And this is the maturing of this kind of a laddership where you realize that it's not just like in that murmuration with all these, it can actually go up to up to 6 million birds. How they do these collective manifestations, you would think, so they've actually studied it. Each starling is only aware of 7 birds around them. So it's not like anyone is seeing the grand shape. No one is seeing it, and yet they fall into that, uh, pattern is because they see what you see on the screen there, that 1 plus 1 is greater than 2. That 1 and 1, you and I coming together, is not just all of what you think you are and all of what I think I am, and addition. It's actually a multiplier in a way that we may not imagine. We cannot imagine because we're only aware of the 7 birds around us, but together it can make a huge difference. And so what you start to do is you go from relationships and connection to synergy to emergence. Emergence, the thing about it is that if you take, it's not just, it's that we create new properties. So I always think of it as like hydrogen and oxygen coming together. If it's just hydrogen and oxygen, like neither one knows about water, no, has liquid. It's not liquid, hydrogen nor oxygen. But when they come together in a certain way, it actually creates a new property altogether. And so how can we, as human beings, as hearts who are moved to serve, to make a difference in the world, to alleviate some suffering in the world, how do we come together in a certain way so that we create new properties, right? That you or I individually may not be able to even imagine.
The second law of
In the interest of time, I think I'll skip this video, but it's a beautiful video around how we start to cohere, or maybe we can watch a couple minutes. Yeah, okay.
The second law of thermodynamics tells us that everything in the universe tends towards disorder, and in complex systems, chaos is the norm. So you'd naturally expect the universe to be messy. And yet, we can observe occasions of spontaneous order, the synchronization of metronomes, the perfectly timed orbits of moons, the simultaneous flashes of fireflies, and even the regular beating of your heart. What puts these things in order in spite of nature's tendency for disorder? This
So
works
you see
regardless of
that
the number.
this is fundamentally the question of laddership. That who it is because of the empty cans that these metronomes, which were out of sync, become in sync, and then the cans are gone, but the synchronization stays. And so, who do we have to be to support that? Right. And that's not a leadership question. That's specifically a laddership kind of question. That who do I have to be empty inside? So to regenerate a kind of compassion, to be in service to the seven star birds around me, and then to dissolve when I need to dissolve. That is fundamentally working on our identity to really go from this field of me to this field of we to something even greater, what we think of as a field of us. So how then do we lead in in our worlds, in our different contexts, whether it's in business or politics or education or civic sector, or even personally, interpersonally, within ourselves? It's the same principle. How do we lead with the gifts of emergence? And I'll just say this to uh, just give you an idea that this is not just a play on words, right? We do these laddership pods, but at a very high level, you can see I spoke about this distinction between centralization and being distributed. But it's also a way, like leaders will often say, let's plan and execute, right? That's my strategy. This is what we go to business school to learn. What ladders do is they will say, let's learn how to see, not do more, but see more. Because when you see more, you're searching and you're able to spot the patterns of positive deviance and skillfully amplify them. So it's a very different competency. And the power goes from, the innovation, the positive deviance moves from center to the edges. So you're not saying, here's my fortress and I'm in the center super secure. You're actually, a ladder will continue to actually be more at the edges than the center. You move from efficiency to resiliency. You move from predictability to emergence that we've been speaking about. You move from the quantity of ties to the depth of ties, to the quality of relationships. And I think even our relational frameworks are so optimized for the number of likes and the number of followers and the number of friends, right? Like it's to really start to think of quality. Um, and so Frederick Laloux has been doing this work for a while, and his summary, which I like, is that he says we used to organize, these architectures of absence, I would say, is how we've been organizing as humanity up to now. We used to organize as wolf packs. Wolf packs are very reactive. You do this, I do this. Oh, you got me angry, I pull out a gun, you pull out a gun, and we both sort of kill each other. From there, we got to more command and control organizations like the modern day armies. And you see this everywhere. And then we said, okay, well, we can do a little bit better than this. And in came the modern day corporation. And the corporation worked more like, instead of the command and control, the top down, it worked more like interchangeable parts. So it was a system, and it's like, okay, well, if this part doesn't work, you throw it out and you get a new part in. And we realized that that's not very relational, right? That's very transactional. You're security guard, and I don't like you, so okay, or you made a mistake today, I just throw you out and replace you with somebody else. But when you do that, you're losing all the relationships the security guard may have made in the network, which are actually affecting the whole. So we've sort of evolved from this mechanistic, interchangeable parts to more of a family kind of purpose-driven organizations that you see more of today. But what he speaks about is moving to a living systems approach. And I think he talks about these teal organizations, but I think there's something even beyond that, where you start to really, it's more like a murmuration. It's more of what you see in nature. And it's really, it's relationships, but tracking those relationships to a deeper context, to then a deeper sense of, emergence and, much more connection.
I'm with
So I'll end with this last video. It's one of my favorites. It's a short one. This is Hung Mai, who popularized permaculture in Vietnam. Just an incredible person, and she's really good at these one-liners. And she has a whole lot of them. But this was one that she had shared when I was last in Vietnam. I was on her farm, and she shared this. And I think it speaks for itself. So here, take a look.
I'm with Hung Mai in Vietnam, and I asked her the question, well, what's the most commonly asked inquiry that you get when you go to the cities? And what would you say, Hung Mai?
The questions we often ask is what to grow here instead of what grows here.
Wow.
Such a simple phrase. She's saying the question that city people usually ask is what to grow here. That I have all of this, I have accumulated through transaction, I have accumulated all this. What should I grow here? You are imposing your ego's will onto this incredible field of life. What she's saying is instead of what to grow here, a permaculture farmer is asking what grows here, which means we're already related. And in this relational fabric, there's already so much happening. I want to be in alignment with that happening. And the question I'm holding would be, what grows here? And that, I think, is the essence, in some sense, of Laddership. That what grows here, right? How do we start to, who do I have to be to ask this question that I'm capable of not just extracting from you and accumulating it and building my identity and then feeling disconnected, but I'm capable of relating to you and not just relating to you at a me to me level, but something much deeper. And then if those relationships are held by a platform of laddership, by these empty cans, then all of a sudden they start to get into coherence and the cans kind of disappear, but this emergence keeps regenerating itself. And so, how can we be those kinds of stewards for the life that is in front of us? How can we be in service? And I think it's a very different modality to go from leadership and even this notion of servant leadership or being a leader in an extractive context, in a transactional context, being a nice person about it, being responsible, being ethical. I think all those things are great, uh, but they have marginal impact when compared to being an empty can and allowing that nature's coherence to actually lead the way. So how do we do this kind of permaculture, not just at at a farming level? That also we need to learn. We hardly know that. But in a much more complex setting with human beings, what does social permaculture look like? And laddership is an inquiry into going there. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm just adding a few seeds of provocation, and would love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, would be happy to clarify something as well or add more stories. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nipun. It's so powerful speech and presentation as usual. And at the same time, it requires a lot of inner transformation in the practice to understand. Because you can sense that usually when Nipun speaks, you cannot understand by the head only. You need the time to reflect, to be still, to experience, and keep reflecting over and over again. So, and I understand that now you have might hold a lot of questions, and it's the time for you to ask him directly. So feel free to unmute yourself to ask the questions in English, or you can write on, or you can speak in Vietnamese, or write on the chat box in Vietnamese, and we're gonna help for the translation.
Oh, I'm giving my own hearts, which is to all of you. Why not?
Nipun, I saw the first question written in the chat box. How do I sense the flow?
How do I sense the flow? And this is the work that we have to do. I think we have to get out of our separate self. I think we're always solidifying our sense of self. And when we do that, we actually start to shrink and disconnect from life. And so, how do we start to sense into the flow? A lot of it is really trusting in the unknowable. I think we find a lot, the ego finds a lot of certainty from the known. So I tend to think of it as three spheres: the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. So the known we understand, and it gives us confidence that, okay, this is true. I've seen it. I understand it. And I think there's value to the known. The unknown is great as well because you're curious. You're like, oh, I don't know how to ride a bike or go swimming, but I have not known many other things and I have learned them. So you're curious, about the things that you don't know, but you can still conquer because you know how to learn. And so the unknown, I think, has a lot of value. But really, there's a third field, which is the unknowable. And this is very hard for the ego because the ego is like, what do you mean unknowable? If it's unknowable, like what role do I play in it, right? Like it's unknowable. And so that the knowing I, is completely arrested. So it cannot really do anything with the unknowable. And yet it's the most profound. Like to build on the starling metaphor, no starling knows all seven, I mean, knows the whole shape. They only know the seven around them. And so it's unknowable to them. So what is our relationship to the unknowable? And I think that's a start. That's a good seed question to ask yourself, that what is my relationship to the known? It's good for confidence, but it can also be very limiting if you're overconfident because then you're just stuck in what you know. How am I expanding my circle of known into the unknown? And who do I have to be? You're a lot more curious. And then how do I arrest this whole mechanism and say, okay, there is a field beyond all of the knowing, and that's a field of the unknowable. And I think as you have a healthy relationship with all three, you start to really sense into the flow. You leverage what you know, you leverage how you learn with the unknown, and you leverage this deep surrender. And that's a really, I would say we have many practices to learn to sense into the flow. You have to quiet the mind, you have to quiet the body. But all of you would probably know a lot more than me how, there's breathing practices and chanting practices and meditation practices and even acts of kindness as practices. These are all profound because they all kind of get you there. And so I would say pick one, but see how your relationship to the known, unknown, and the unknowable evolves as you practice that.
Thank you so much, Nipun. But the unknowable can be said as like the blind spot.
From a lens of the ego, it could be like a blind spot, yes. But I think there's much more than, I mean, it's like if ego is not your only lens, then it's not just a blind spot, then it's just life. So the goal from the lens of the ego, you say, well, because of my blind spots, I'm completely, biased. And because of my biases, I have unintended consequences in my life. I'm doing something for good, but then so many bad things happen because of that. So it's a good intention, but bad effects. And you say, well, I should become more aware. But at some point, you hit the limits of that awareness. So even like the Buddha would say to his students that there is no way that you're going to know even an awakened person, an arhat does not know cause and effect. Like you cannot, for every effect, you may be able to know one or two causes, but there are so many other causes behind it. And so there is no way you can predictably come in and say, oh, I know why this happened because of this, this, and this. Or you do this, and this, and this will happen. That is a person who is, too much in the field of the known, addicted to that world. So I trust the Buddha when he says, even an awakened person will not be able to understand cause and effect. So you just kind of have to see how you develop deeper capacities.
Thank you so much, Nipun. It's wisely said. And please allow me to go to the next questions. How can we launch such approach?
How can we launch such a, oh, let me see. Oh, there's a bunch of, oh, I should go a little quicker. Okay, how can we launch such an approach? How do we lead with, how do we practice laddership? How do we launch a project with laddership? And I think it's, you really have to look at your building blocks. I would say I think it's possible everywhere. I think one way is to start to think how you can create a more relational web in your communities. So let's say you're like a, I remember one business at the end of every meeting, they would take out a deck of kindness cards, a smile deck, and each one would have its own unique act of kindness. And they would go out, and it takes a couple minutes to do. They go out and do it, but at the next meeting, when they come back in, their check-in isn't, "Hey, how are you doing?" Or "What's the weather?" Like these very mundane things. It's like, "Well, tell us about that act of kindness you did last time." And everyone goes around and they share about that small act of kindness. And it changes the vibe in the room. It changes how they relate to each other. It changes what comes out of that meeting. It changes the psychological safety that everyone feels. It's no longer just your opinion versus mine in this narrow context of our business. It's like, oh, there's a human being behind it that contains multitudes. So I would say, there's many ways to intervene, but it's open to your experimentation. How do we build deeper relationships within the context that we are embedded in? So I'll just go. I'm now looking at the chat window, so maybe the next question is, what is the meaning of the empty can, right? How can it influence the order? And an empty can comes in and says, so Hung Mai actually had another really wise thing to say, and she said that, what we do on a permaculture farm is that we just have to do 5% and let nature do the 95%. But the real challenge is knowing which 5% is ours to do. Because if we do the wrong 5%, then we keep thinking this is not enough. Let me go from this 5% to 10% to 20 to 30. And then you're like extracting all this stuff. And then you're feeling burnt out by the time you're doing 40, 45%. And that was never yours to do. Like you just got to like figure out your 5%. And so wisdom really is, or progress or evolution is really not in doing more, but in actually doing less, but doing the right less so that you allow nature to do the 95. So if it's not just like, oh, I'm going to be sitting there being lazy, and just do less because, I just like to feel good vibrations in my body. And yeah, like I just like to be relaxed. That's not what nature teaches us. That's subconscious laziness. But nature is saying what you're capable of doing is this 5%. Go out and do that 5. First, discern what the right 5% is. Then go out and do it with full heart. And then trust that I have your back with the 95%. And that's a wise person. Doing even the smallest acts can actually have a tremendous ripple effect. So hopefully that clarifies. Um, Maybe Luan, should I just go down because now I'm looking at my chat. So, or do you want to screen these, or I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. So the next question is about I think is we understand the metaphor of the empty can is the mindset and the attitude of leadership. And the next question is about how can we build that empty can in the workforce context or in the university?
Yeah, I think one good practice. So there was this guy. Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank, but he has tens of thousands of employees. It'll come to me. Bob Chapman. Yes. So Bob Chapman, very successful businessman, multi-billion dollar companies. He's been running it for decades with tens of thousands of employees. And his aha moment came when he was at a wedding, and at the wedding, he looks and he sees at the father who's like beaming. His daughter is getting married, and he gives this incredible toast and shares all this love with his daughter. And as he's doing that, he's telling the groom saying that, oh, take care of my daughter, and it was a very beautiful moment. He comes out of that and he's thinking, oh, wait a second. I always thought that this is my employee, but actually it is someone's precious child. It's not just my employee that's transacting that I'm giving money to, then I expect this labor. It's someone's precious child. So I have these 10,000 someone's precious child in my care. How do I then respond? So that kind of a framing, he had another aha moment when he went to when he goes to a church, and in less than an hour he comes out of there and he's like, oh my God, I am feeling so elevated. And sometimes you go to some of these religious places and you're like just feeling alive. And he says, this was 1 hour of my life. I have all these people for 40 hours of the week. How do I give them that kind of an experience, right? And I think these are the kinds of questions you need to ask, that you're capable of doing so much with so much that is entrusted to you if you're a leader of a company or if you're a leader of a group or even if you're a leader of yourself, that is its own company because we have so many entities going on around within ourselves. So I think that framing can open us up into more relational webs, and then to start to look within that web and say, how do I create a giver culture as opposed to a taker culture? And I think there's a lot to unpack there as well.
Thank you, Nipun. Yeah, create a giver culture. And the next question is about the ego, because everything that we want to become, embody the spirit, the essence of leadership is the big question here. How we can know that about the ego. When I do a small act of kindness, I may feel good about myself. That can be, build up our own ego without the consciousness. How can I be mindful about that? So doing act of kindness can really and purely lead to inner transformation.
Yeah, you can go very deep with that question. How do you know? Even if you're very far along the way, ego is very slippery. And so I like the Buddha's advice in this regard. And the Buddha said to his attendant, Anand, at one point, and Anand asked him, he says, it seems like, half of the path is just noble friends. This is Anand asking Buddha, telling Buddha that. And the Buddha responds and says, no, Anand, it is not half the path, it is the full path. It is the whole of holy life. So I think the ego by itself, it cannot be trusted. And you're like, well, how am I to get out of this thing if it's so dominated by the ego? Well, here's the thing. You can't get out of it, and neither can I. But if I help you and you help me, we've got a shot. And that's the Buddha's insight, noble friends. That it's not just going to be, well, give me all this technology or give me all these toolkits or give me all this knowledge or give me all the, even if you're not existing in your body and you're living in realms of just the mind, still very, very slippery slope. because the ego is, in fact, it's even more dangerous. And so I think we in human form is fantastic that the reason why this human life is so precious is because we clearly can see the good and the bad, right? The joy and the compassion and the suffering. Now imagine if you couldn't see the suffering for a long period of time. And if some of these saints are trusted, there are such states, very, very dangerous. And so this is our opportunity to look and say, okay, well, the ego is not the master of the domain. There's a lot of things the ego doesn't have control over, conquest over. So you say, okay, I see that because I see the suffering. I see that. I see suffering in myself. I see suffering in my relationships. I see suffering in the larger world. I see suffering in the systems. It's everywhere. And because it's everywhere, you're like, okay, maybe I need to rethink this a little bit. And so I would say, really, the best defense is noble friends. And how can and you're not going to have noble friends because you want them, because you like somebody on LinkedIn. You're not going to have a noble friend. You have to be a noble friend to have a noble friend, which means you first have to start to practice being noble, right? And so that's inner transformation. And then you have to practice serving because serving is the only way you create a friendship. Like me taking something from you, no friendship. You and I indulging in our senses by going out somewhere, watch, yeah, that's not going to last too long, right? But the deepest bond will be if you and I serve others together. So serve and do it in this deep, with this deep awareness, and that's the best insurance.
Thank you, Nipun. That remind me about the conversation I had with Nipun and Tu in Parak when I asked them about the noble friendship. Is then you know that they practice this staying in silence, in stillness and reflection once a week in more than 10 years. So and they never go out together for coffee or movie at all. They just be together for the practice and serving others. And
Yeah.
and to tell me that every time if you have something at 3 a.m., so 20 or 30 people are gonna be in front of your door. They're gonna be there for you, and that's the power.
Oh,
So
they had an incredible story. So they run, and this would be great for some subset of you to do this. They created a circle of noble friends. Now, the basis of this noble friendship circle was that your suffering is my suffering and my suffering is your suffering, right? And so they had an amazing example. One guy comes in and he says, "Man, I just got diagnosed with diabetes and it's really bad. I need to make these changes, but I just don't think I'm capable. So I'm just gonna give up on it." And without telling him, I think they had like 18 people in the group, 17 of them gave up sugar for the month. The 18th guy had the diabetes, but these 17 people gave up sugar for the month. And when they did that, it just normalized it. It made him feel like, oh, we're getting together and no one's having sugar and it's fine. And it's like, oh, okay, if I was able to do it on Monday, maybe I can do it on Tuesday. And it just changes the baseline. And then he was able to do it. But it's like that's noble kinship, and I think we're capable of that.
so powerful. Yeah, incredible. So probably we move to the last question. You have mentioned heart intelligence. How do you define it?
Art intelligence, yeah. I give sometimes I give a talk. In fact, tomorrow I have one at a company called SAP, and I'm going to be talking about that AI and then heart intelligence. What is heart intelligence? And I think the heart intelligence, it's actually a profound kind of intelligence. Just like we understand the head intelligence, which is also very useful. Um, we use it all the time. I use it, every moment of my life. But there's also this profound heart intelligence. And this has three layers. The way I've come to understand it is that there's a kind of personal coherence, starts really at a personal level. We have to be in coherence on the inside. So if you look at what happens when you have an angry thought, it completely messes up your nervous system. Like it's like going like this. You're completely in chaos. If you have a thought of appreciation and gratitude, immediately, like you have this profoundly coherent sine waves that you see in terms of your heart rate variability. And there's so many other metrics to do this. So I think there's a personal coherence, and then there's a social coherence of how we relate with each other. And if I'm in coherence, it actually makes it easy for you to be in coherence. And vice versa. It's regenerative. What we spoke about, absence, presence, and regeneration. There is this social coherence that starts to happen. And then you go wider and wider, and you include, like, animals, and you include nature, and you include like larger and larger arcs, and you have planetary coherence. And I think we're capable of all of this. And it starts with our hearts being in alignment. And this is so incredible. Like the whole acupuncture point for unlocking this whole thing is actually our hearts. Not our heads, not our hands, but our hearts. All the head is very important and very useful. The hands are very important and very useful. But our heart, if the mystics and the sages of all traditions are to be trusted, they keep saying, this is the center, pay attention to this. Like at the end of the day, it is not going to be how much you have done with your hands. It is not going to be how much you have learned with your head. What is going to matter most is how much you have loved. And this insight, it is in a way understandable for a child even, but it, I think, needs to be the front and center of even our adult lives. If we do that, we unlock these incredible fields of coherence. And so this is actual, like a very real intelligence. I mean, science says there's neurons in the heart, but that's still superficial. I mean, yes, there's neurons in the brain, there's some in the heart, there's some in the gut, but I think this is a level far, far beyond that as well. And I think it's just unlock. I would say just try it. Like Toe began, like what we did in Costa Rica, like go out and do an act of kindness. I know we've got like a minute left, but I'll end with this story because this is so great and it relates to the opening story. So I was in Austria at a very big gathering with many thousands of people, and at one point they were talking about climate change, and I was talking about some of this stuff, and um, the other panelist comes and he's like, that sounds very utopian. You think it can really work? You think people are really kind and loving? Like people are kind of mean, right? Like people are selfish. And he asked that, and it had just so happened that like 5 minutes before this talk, I was outside getting coffee, and I had given a talk on the main stage the day before. I was getting coffee, and someone had come up to me and said, "Oh, I really appreciated your talk yesterday." I was like, "Oh, thank you. What's your name?" We started talking, and then I said, "Oh, I'm about to get something, coffee for myself." So I said, can I get you something?" And they were like, "Oh, that's really sweet of you." I said, "Yeah, sure, and they said, "No, no, let me pay." I said, "No, no, no, I got it. Allow me the honor to pay for you." And so I did, and it was a small amount, but she felt really amazing. And she says, "Tomorrow I'll get it for you. I'll find you and I'll get you something." I said, "No, no, no need to do something back for me. Pay it forward." And she's like, "Oh, but I want to do it for you." And I said, "Yeah, but we're all deeply interconnected. So why don't you do it for somebody else?" And she says, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." And I said, "Well, why don't you just, instead of doing it tomorrow, do it now? Pay for the random person behind us." And she's like, okay, and the guy taking our order is like got a big smile while he's doing this order, and she's a little nervous. How do you talk? Strange person. And she looks back and she gives him, they have this beautiful interaction. She has to explain it that I'm just doing this, and they forgot the coffee and she was going to do it, but forget the coffee. They started bonding. And this second person feels that and says, this was such a great thing. I'm going to do it for the person behind me. And then they start talking, and these started with three people, started to have a mini community, and I'm even out of the picture. And the barista's looking at me saying, "Okay, yeah, this is a good trick, you know." And it's like, "Okay, we got this. Like this is natural. This is our intrinsic nature. This doesn't need rocket science. And to unlock this is really to just to step into it. And this is not even about financial capacity because most of the times even I don't have the financial means to be able to create that you could do it without any money. It just needs a heart generated by love, and I think if we awaken that heart intelligence, it takes us down this path of not just personal coherence but then this social permaculture and this laddership and being an empty can, and then just this incredible planetary impact, which will be unknowable, and yet it is profoundly, profoundly satisfying. Like I have no idea if I have changed the world in any significant way, and yet I feel satisfied. I'm just not asking that question. The question doesn't arise. Does my life have meaning? Have I impacted a few? I don't know. Like maybe, maybe not. Maybe but that question just doesn't arise. And yet there is this profound satisfaction. And I think this is the path of personal heart intelligence, social permaculture, and incredible ripple effect of in the field of emergence. So thank you for your time and your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nipun, for creating that kind of beautiful social permaculture field for all of us to experience today. We've been experienced many times that at the beginning that require you a little bit of courage to start doing more act of kindness. But once you experience that, you're gonna satisfied, content, happy because the joy that you receive. So the last thing that I will like to invite all of you, please write on the chat box that any kind of act of kindness, anything that you would like to pay it forward after this webinar today, please share it with us, share among ourselves to see the ripple effect, of love among us and above us. People can choose, yeah.
I'm saying thank you on there, but I don't know, it probably got buried, but I just want to say thank you to all of you for resonating. Thank you to To and Luan and everyone who has helped organize, and not just organize, who has held these values front and center for so long. And it has a profound ripple effect. It's unknowable ripple effect, but it's a beautiful thing. I see it, I feel it, and I appreciate it. So thank you for including me in your field of love.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nipun, for spending time and by starting the thing without seeking for impact, but you are impacting a lot for the world. You are changing the world, and we are so happy to be part of that. And thank you so much, Paige, for inviting Nipun for this webinar and create the bridge between Vietnam and all over the world. Thank you so much, everyone, sister and brothers, uncle and auntie, to be here today, spend 1 hour and a half, hour with us. And we hope that you feel the love, and we love you all. See you next
Big
time.
hugs. Big hugs.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Love
please
you
feel free to call
all.
on me as your brother and sister, as brothers and sisters. So
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
where's my hearts? Bye, everybody.
Chào cả nhà.
Chào anh chị, chào cả nhà. Chúc ngủ
Xin chào
ngon.
mọi người.
Chúc mọi người
Yeah.
ngủ ngon nè.
Chúc cả
Tạm
nhà
biệt
ngủ
mọi người.
ngon.
Chào cả nhà.
Yeah.
Chúc
Cảm
cả
ơn
nhà ngủ
Paul nha.
ngon.